So Nathan Davis for State House, LD 18. He has a 4-point plan to launch legislation at the State House. The first item is reinvest in public education. Second, combat climate change. 3 is democracy and the promotion. And the last is healthcare. So a big warm welcome to you, Nathan. Let's give everybody a nice little round of applause for Nathan.
Well, thank you, Joe. Thank you so much for having me again. Kind of the format that I want to do, because I've spoken with so many of you in the past, and including here, since I spoke with DGT, I think about 7 months ago now. It's been a minute. I will go over kind of those 4 points that Joe said: healthcare, education, climate change, democracy, and healthcare. And then I really want to spend as much time as I can kind of getting into the nitty gritty. I know that, you know, a lot of you, I'm sure, have tuned into the candidate forums that we've had, and the questions have been very general, but I want to give this group a chance to really ask some specific and pointed questions. Okay, so jumping right into it. Education, like Joe said, this is an area that I am incredibly passionate about. It is one of the most important responsibilities of the state government, and it is one of the areas where money is spent in the most fiscally responsible way. So just as a little background, about every dollar spent on high quality public preschool, every dollar spent on high quality preschool has about a 10-to-1 return for the state. By the time you get to, so you have 10-to-1 up here, pre-K, 3, 4, or 5-year-olds. By the time you get to post-secondary after high school, the return is closer to 3-to-1. So the return is still incredibly high. But it really ramps up the younger that they are, that the kids are. And that's why one of the big policy proposals that I'm running on, that I will champion, is universal public preschool in Arizona, based on the model used in Washington, D.C. Other states have universal pre-K models. I believe that Washington, D.C. has the most effective, and I can get into specifics on there. Obviously, we need to increase funding for K-12 education to at least the national median. But beyond funding, we have to make tweaks within, we have to make tweaks to make our public schools better and run more smoothly. You know, that includes making sure that every school has a registered nurse, every school has counselors at the recommended 250 students per counselor ratio. The current ratio in Arizona is about 900-to-1, and to have caps on class sizes. I think this is especially important in K through 3, but I think it's also critical that we don't have 40 kids in a class in high school. Even no matter how well behaved teenagers are, they're still teenagers. And you can only do so. I know this from experience, being a middle school teacher and having my roster, have more students than desks, that at some point you're in crowd control mode and not teaching mode. And then finally, one of the areas that I've been really pushing for more recently is the idea of a universal community college. This came about from multiple perspectives. One of the biggest was, so I still substitute teach in the district. I used to be a full-time teacher, and I still substitute teach in TUSD. And I was recently in a high school class, and the kids were talking about, it was April, they'd gotten their letters back from colleges. A bunch of them were very excited to be attending the U of A or New Mexico State or UCLA or where have you. And a few of them were going to go to trade schools. And I was, very gung-ho about that, because that's, a very good way to continue to get training and education. And to, instead of making $14 an hour at McDonald's, now you can make $20 an hour as a vet tech or more. And one girl was mentioning that she was going to go to Carrington College, and that she had talked to somebody and she was going to be a vet tech, and she was going to take out student loans for it. And I didn't know a whole lot about it. And I looked up Carrington College. The program to be a vet tech, actually, let's take a step back. A vet tech makes about $30,000 a year. This is not a high paying job. You know, they are not a veterinarian. They're not getting paid in that way. A vet tech makes about 30 grand a year. Carrington College's tuition is about $16,000 a year, and the program is 19 months. You know, so she would have been going and getting a lot of debt for a job that would not have paid very well at all. Conversely, she could go to PEMA and get the same certification for $5,000. And as an added benefit, if she then wanted to go and get a bachelor's degree, she could transfer all of her credits from PEMA straight to the U of A, ASU, NAU. And so, you know, our community colleges are an amazing, amazing resource. Like I said, it's a 3-to-1 return for every dollar invested in the state. And that will come back to the state in terms of increased revenue from taxing, as well as savings later down the road. And for the students, it's about a 6-to-1 return for them personally. Every dollar invested in community college is about $6 back in earnings for them. So I really, really believe that that's the way that we as Democrats need to start thinking and talking about public education, not just focusing on the K-12 where we really desperately need it, the funding, the reforms, but going 2 years on either side of that. And we need to really be talking about universal pre-K and post-secondary education. Okay, moving on. And again, I am very open and I'm looking forward to everybody's questions, but kind of moving on from education to climate change. This is an area that is an existential threat for our ability as Arizona to continue to grow and thrive. If we do nothing, Arizona will hit a tipping point and Phoenix will start to look a lot like Detroit. Arizona will start to look, and a lot of the Sun Belt, frankly, will start to look like a lot of the Rust Belt. Air conditioning is great. Air conditioning has allowed people to be able to live comfortably in Arizona. At some point, the current level of technology that we are using just simply is not going to be effective to keep a certain quality of life here. This is most notable with water. If Arizona has to, and if we do nothing, this is where we're headed, have the draconian water cuts that California had to put in place, that will cause people to leave. That is a noticeable quality of life reduction. And so, for water with climate change, we have to take action now. And that is going to include requiring new construction to use water efficient, to be more water efficient, to have incentives to build, to retrofit older homes and construction to be more water efficient, to build our infrastructure so that it focuses more on replenishing, having rainwater replenish aquifers rather than rainwater simply evaporating, going back into the atmosphere. Additionally, looking at electricity, we have to get away from fossil fuels. And this is part of and move to renewables. And this movement from fossil fuels to renewables is energy independence. That's what true energy independence is, because we can generate the electricity, here domestically. We don't have to import oil or coal or natural gas from other states. Arizona doesn't have any of this in vast quantities. Additionally, it will have cascading benefits. So moving with electrification will reduce pollution, which will, in the aggregate, save lives and reduce deaths from asthma and other known carcinogens that are in the air. Additionally, as we move towards electrification, as we move the fleet from being primarily gas powered with sometimes natural gas powered to fully electrified, that will bring in the battery capacity that we need to be able to deal with the peaks and valleys of renewable energy generation. If we move to a system where basically everybody has an electric car and every electric car has a big battery and everybody can draw on that battery for power, the big question of, well, what do we do about batteries kind of solves itself. Okay, quickly moving on still, democracy. I'm sure many of you are watching the January 6th hearings and are reminded of how fragile democracy is. How what we have built over the last few centuries is built on norms and a set of beliefs, and how we have a faction within the Republican Party that does not believe in democracy, fundamentally. And so we must shore that up at the state level, at the national level, but also at the state level. And I think at the state level, that means that we need to adopt same-day and automatic voting registration, that we should expand or reinstate the permanent early voter list, move where rather than early votes have to arrive by election day, that we simply make it where they have to be postmarked by election day. This is a very simple thing that states like California have done that make it much, much simpler for voters to be able to be informed and take as much time as they need to vote without getting to the weird situation of, it's July 26th. Is it too late for me to send in my ballot and have it count? And additionally, I believe that we need to move towards ranked choice voting here in the state of Arizona. Other states are moving that way. Maine has it for federal elections. New York City has it for their mayoral and I think city council elections. Alaska has just implemented it, and they have a very interesting system. And I'm happy to go into more detail about what ranked choice looks like, how it's different than, for example, the jungle primaries that are in or the jungle elections that are in California or Louisiana. This is also an area where I think that there can be some bipartisan support in shoring up democracy and democratic institutions. I believe that now, whether this will happen with a Republican majority, I don't know. But when Democrats take back the legislature, when we control the governor's mansion, which we will do this decade, this is an area, democratic reform, increasing voting access, that I believe we can get some Republicans to get on board with. Finally, looking at healthcare, I think I should say a few things up front. I fundamentally believe healthcare is a human right. And I also believe that Arizona does not have a large enough economy to guarantee healthcare in a way that I believe is required. I think that we have to, when we talk about universal healthcare, it really does need to come from the federal government. That is the only entity with the buying power to and the borrowing power to really implement a universal healthcare system for all Americans. However, there are things the state can do to move in that direction. I'm going to start with education and then kind of move my way up. So, like I said, every school needs to have a nurse. That is a very, very, very simple way to communicate to children and to their parents the importance of healthcare. Simply having a registered nurse who can, for example, explain the benefits of vaccines to children and to their parents. Kind of moving from there, I believe, and I've been talking with people who are at various levels of expertise in the healthcare system. I believe that the state really should work with local nonprofits, counties, and towns and cities to expand access to primary care that goes beyond simply, making sure that everybody can go into that no one's turned away from the ER or having free clinics. I think that we should be moving. El Rio, I think, is a really good example of what I have in mind that we could expand statewide. I believe that the state could work with towns, councils, counties and groups like El Rio to essentially provide what I'm calling primary care, like universal primary care to the people of Arizona. Lastly, some of you might be familiar with a concept called sprinkle care that was thrown around in the teens in Nevada. Essentially, it's a universal Medicaid buy-in. I am a huge proponent of that. I think that is a way that Arizonans can get access to healthcare, can have high quality healthcare, and don't have to worry about, losing the healthcare that they like, as they move from job to job or as their employer changes their health insurance on them. So those are, the big four policy areas: education, climate change, democracy, and healthcare. And I want to kind of leave it there and kind of open it up if I can, and just ask everyone here if there are any questions. Oh, Joe, you're on mute.
I'm sure there's questions waiting for you, Nathan. And all you have to do is put your hand up, go down to the bottom of the page in reactions, and hit the raise hand button. And if Mike Bryan's going to be monitoring the chat room, if you'd like Mike to ask your question for you. So first question, Lee Oler.
Hi, Nathan. I'm curious, as I ask this of everyone, who are you running against in the primary, and in the is there anybody in the general that we should know about?
Yeah, so I'll also kind of mention what LD 18 looks like, because it is, the lines did get changed a bit. So I'll start within the city. So in the city, south of River, LD 18 includes everything south of River between Country Club and Camino Seco down to Broadway. There's two small little fingers that go out between Pantano and Camino Seco down to Escalante. And then in the bottom third of Sam Hughes, from between Broadway, Tucson, and Fifth. Now, once you get above River, it's all of the foothills from Sabino Canyon, the creek, not the road, over to the I-10. And basically when you get to the area of town that I live at, the northwest side, the Casa Stobes area, it's north of River and basically south of Overton, Hardy, Cortero. The line gets a little janky when you get into the town of Marana. So we've got a 5-way race. LD 18 is kind of a combination of LD 9 and LD 10, and so a lot of us who would have run in either or got put together. Most of you have heard from the other people running, Chris, Kat, Nancy, and Charlie. Yeah, the main thing that I would say, the difference that I have, with them is I, was born and raised here in Tucson. I've taught in K-12 schools as a full-time teacher, full-time middle school teacher, and as a substitute. I've been deeply involved in Democratic politics since I came back to Tucson from grad school in 2016, first as a volunteer on Pam Powers-Hanley's campaign in 2016, and then on the executive committee in LD9 and with PCDP, and as a candidate running for the Amphitheater School Board. And then on the Republican side, there is a Republican running for the Arizona House in LD 18. The only way I can describe her is Wendy Rogers, is a new age version of Wendy Rogers. That's kind of she's an interesting character. The thing that I always say too is LD 18 is pretty democratic, but also LD 10 was pretty democratic, and we had Claude Felter, and LD 9 was pretty democratic, and we had Ethan Orr. So it's really important that we recognize that after August 3rd, if I win, whoever wins, if it's me and whoever else it is, for the Arizona House. We can't rest on our laurels. We have to hit the ground running hard, especially going after those persuadable independents and Democrats who maybe they voted in 2020, but they have no history of voting in midterm, because this election is critical. The people who we select as governor, as Secretary of State, and the state legislature will be in power for the 2024 elections. And you all have seen the January 6th committee. They're going to try it again.
Thank you. I love your points, especially about Pima College. I think they are so valuable, and they have some very good classes out there, and they turn out some very good graduates too. So I'm glad that you're. What about JTIG?
So this is why I really wanted to wait for questions, because this is when I get to kind of get in the nitty gritty. Okay, so JTED is amazing, and the programs that it provides are great. The biggest problem that we have in the state is our funding structure, because essentially, because of how we fund public education, our JTED schools and our public schools are in competition with each other. This becomes really challenging because, so schools, for example, will have a CTE, a career technical education program, and in automotives, and JTED will have a program in automotives. And the, Cholla High School, for example, doesn't want their kids to, only go to Cholla half the day and then go to JTED the other half the day, because that will reduce the amount of money going into Cholla High School. So I think it's really important when we look at the funding is we say, like, hey, our public high schools, our JTEDs, our community colleges, they shouldn't be in competition with each other for funding with these kids. We really should be encouraging them to synergize with each other. One area too is with a lot of schools have joint programs with Pima, where kids take a class at the high school and they get credit through Pima Community College. That is a great innovation, but it is an innovation that only exists because of the quirk that if the kids just went to Pima instead of going to the class in high school, the high school would lose out on funding. So I think we really have to look at funding and say, like, let's encourage these institutions to work with each other instead of against each other.
Thank you.
Yeah, Steve Linder, you have a question.
Okay, hi Nathan. Okay, let's just say, perfect world, you're elected, and you go up to the legislature and there's a Democratic majority and everything's wonderful. But in an imperfect world, you're elected and Democrats are still in the minority. How do you expect to accomplish what you'd like to accomplish, knowing what those Republicans are like and trying to get them to do anything at all?
So this is an area where I disagree with some of the people that the other Democrats running in this primary. I don't expect to get a whole lot done if I'm in the minority. And frankly, that's how democratic governments work. The people elect a majority. That majority goes and does what they want. I'm not going to go up, and I'm not going to tell you that I'm going to be able to go up to the legislature and I'm going to go and I'm going to get Vince Leach to realize he's wrong on climate change, or convince Wendy Rogers that CRT isn't a thing and our public schools do need more funding. The voters in the former LD11, and in Rogers District, they know who these people are. They elected them because they're far right. The thing that I'm going to do, and I'm really going to focus on, is really highlighting where the bills that are being put forward by the majority are horrific. And not trying to kill them quietly behind the scenes, but really, doing explainers in the way that Steve Farley did when he was in the legislature and Pam Powers-Handley does, and really explain to people and really communicate with the caucus that this is how we need to talk about this bill. This isn't a thing about freedom or cutting taxes. This is a giveaway to, Kyle's buddy who owns the shop down the road. That's all this is. That's how, and I think that's really how we kill things. The other thing is, looking forward, I believe we are going to have a Democratic majority in the legislature this decade. I think we could get parity. It doesn't look good this cycle, but I think parity in 2024 in one of the chambers is not unreasonable. And depending on how people move around, 2026, 2028 could be a year that we do take one or both chambers. And I think there's a few reasons for that. One, the people of Arizona are not on board with the Republican agenda. They just aren't. The people don't want vouchers. They want their public schools funded. They don't want to privatize everything. They want the government to work for them. And so I really believe that we need to work as a caucus from now until we have a majority to refine what we'll do when we take power. Because I think the thing that must happen is the second we take the legislature, we have to have our education bill, and we have to have our healthcare bill, and we have to have our climate change bill. And we can't be screwing around like what the Republicans are doing right now with the budget, right? If we get power, we might just have one shot at it. And we've got to communicate effectively to the voters of Arizona. You elect Democrats, and Democrats get things done for you. So Steve, that's the way that I really see it. Like I said, I think there's some areas where there could be some bipartisan, something that happens in a bipartisan manner, but it's going to be small. It just always is. Look at the budget, for example. There's no indication that the Republicans have any intention of bringing a single Democrat on board for the budget. And I don't see that trend changing. I don't see them seeing the light, moving forward.
Okay. So, Mike Bryan, we have some questions from the chat room.
Actually, I don't have any questions from the chat at this point. Nobody's typed any. I certainly encourage them to do so. But I do have a question of my own. During your presentation, Nathan, you indicated that you felt that Arizona's economy is too small to have universal health care. We are $1/3 of $1 trillion economy. So what exactly leads you to the conclusion that we're too small an economy to have universal health care in the state of Arizona?
So the biggest thing isn't necessarily the size of the economy. It's the fact that we can't borrow like the Fed can, and that we have balanced budget requirements. So we're probably going into a recession, or we're slightly in a recession right now. The economy is very, I have a master's degree in, functionally I have a master's degree in economics, and this stuff is complicated. I've been kind of digging back my textbooks and kind of looking up, Fed policies again, and trying to figure out, better educate myself of how to read Bureau of Labor Statistics and Federal Reserve memos again. So the biggest issue is, let's say we had a big program, it was universal health care, great. If there's an economic downturn, and our expenditures outweigh our revenues, we're going to have to make cuts. And that's an area that, it gets really bad, because what we don't want to have happen is we have this program, it does really well, and then it's cut. And then then the economy gets better, and yay, we have it again. And then 4 years later, it's cut. The United States is not Australia. We have recessions fairly regularly. And in the state of Arizona, we've seen, for example, with public education, when there's a recession, massive cuts can happen, and that can have devastating outcomes. I did see a question from Don.
That's a good answer, actually. I just wanted to thank you for that answer, and tell you that, yeah, I can see that, our revenues fluctuate wildly based on our over-reliance on sales tax. So yeah, it's a very good point. And yeah, Don just asked the question in the chat if you want to address that.
Yeah, so Don, and I'm sure some of you who have run for office, you'll know a little bit about the endorsement process, but just to give a rundown, essentially as soon as we file as candidates, our inboxes just get flooded with requests for questionnaire responses. Usually endorsements are wrapped up in the May area, in the May range. I don't know what's going on exactly, but endorsements are really lagging. Right now, I have not received any endorsements, but the Pima Area Labor Federation hasn't announced who they're endorsing yet. I did get the Pima, when I ran for the Amphi School Board, I was endorsed by Save Our Schools and the Pima Area Labor Federation. I don't know, obviously I'm not privy to, their discussions about who they'll endorse, but I do hope that I get, as a former union member, through the Tucson Education Association, I do hope that I get labor's endorsement again. And then obviously there's the Arizona Education Association, whose endorsement I should be hearing back from within a week, but since I am one of the 2 teachers I'm seeing some thumbs up from Steve, so I'm hoping that there's some information there. I'm as a an educator, I do, in a public school, I do hope I get their endorsement. Yeah.
Okay.
So stay tuned.
Yeah, Mike, you have a question.
Yeah, there's a few more in the chat. Karen Gleason wants to know, do you think the assumed Roe v. Wade decision and gun control issue will work in our favor in the primary? I guess you could append to that question, how do you plan to use those issues when it comes to getting elected?
So we'll go with abortion care and then gun control. I have been very clear in where I stand. Abortion care is health care, and health care is a human right. I think that as Democrats, just keep it simple. Oftentimes we try to treat Republicans like they are good faith actors, and they aren't. And when we are talking about this, if they make any points about personhood or when does life start or anything like that, it's beside the point. What we need to say is, healthcare or abortion care is a normal part of healthcare. It is part of family planning. It is something that many women will need at some point in their life or choose to have at some point in their life. And like all healthcare decisions, it's their decision. Now, how it will work for the primary and for the general, I have no idea. The Supreme Court ends their term at the very end of this month. I wouldn't expect to get the ruling for Dobbs until maybe somewhere between the 25th and the 30th of June. I'm going to be very interested there and to see if the draft opinion by Alito is very similar or if they make major changes. One of the things that I will say to look out for, so these Supreme Court rulings, you can't look at them just by themselves. They are used to set up for future Supreme Court rulings. One of the things to look out for is this notion of fetal personhood. That is incredibly dangerous because it is essentially, and we saw this with Alito's draft opinion, they're trying to get that into law. And what that would say is that life begins at conception, and that has very dangerous long-term effects. If life begins at conception, then drinking or smoking during pregnancy is child abuse, and you can go to jail for it. If it begins at conception, then the pill and IUDs are a form of murder. If it begins at conception, then IVF may be illegal, and for many women and many families, IVF is a tool that is needed to start a family. It's about control. That's what this is. Everything the Republicans are doing about abortion care, it's about control, and that's really the way we need to frame it. Looking at gun control, I'm cautiously hopeful that we will get something from the federal government. It looks good. Is it what we need? No. Does all gun control need to come from the federal government? Absolutely not. Arizona is a bastion for cheap, loose guns that often go to places like LA or Mexico or other states and are used in violent crime. You know, by not having universal background checks, by not having waiting periods, by allowing guns to be able to be sold without any supervision through private sellers, we are aiding and abetting crimes happening domestically and internationally. That's the way that I see it. And this is one of the things. I don't think we can get gun control with a Republican controlled legislature. When Democrats get control, common sense gun control is on. I think it's absolutely on the table. I'm a gun owner. I hunt. I believe I have my guns in a storage unit, not a storage unit, in a safe, and I keep that key is only known to myself and my wife, and I plan to have that be in another facility, or probably in a safety deposit box. So there's a gap there as well. That might be a little extreme, but the idea that every gun should be in a safe, secure location, unless you're out hunting or on a shooting range, I think is something that most gun owners agree with. Actually, I'm gonna go ahead and limit this. Responsible gun owners don't leave their guns not locked up, flat out. So in terms of what this will look like for the general election for Democrats, for the state legislature, I don't know how much of an effect it'll have because of the gerrymandering that took place with our current districts. But I think that this is an area where Democrats can do what we do best and lead the way on progressive policies that will, support the people and that have the backing of the majority.
Okay. We have a question from Mary Gresham in the chat. She asks, please ask Nathan Davis, what will you do to attract and hire teachers in Arizona? So many have left teaching during the pandemic.
Yeah, so this is, yeah, okay, good. I'm glad you said this. All right, so there's a few different ways that we can do this. First, we have to bring teacher salaries to the national median at the very least. Just absolutely. If you begin your career in education to USD, you will start on year one making about $40,000. On year 20 into USD, you will make about $50,000. That is not a career path that is, reasonable unless you are, have another source of income. If your spouse is an engineer, or you have a trust fund, you can't. So it's. Yeah, so Michael mentioned starting salary in Georgia at 50K. I care a lot less about starting salary. Keep it at 40, keep it at 50. I don't really care. My thing is that, by the end of your career, 25, 30 years, a teacher should be making six figures. That's the main thing. When I started teaching, and me and my cousin started teaching at the same time, me here in Arizona and my cousin in Illinois, rural Illinois, we both started making the same amount. By the end of 3 years, she was making $4,000 more than me, because where my step was $500 a year, her step was $1,800 a year. And that's really what we're talking about. That's why we lose teachers so quickly. Now, besides pay, there's some other things that we can do. And there's some ideas that I have that are a little bit different, and I haven't quite seen them mentioned before, but I think that they would be very useful. So I did my master's at the George Washington University in DC, and the naval base is right nearby, and there's an it's DC, so every military branch has a base right nearby. So I went to school with a lot of career officers, and basically what they did is, they got their full salary, they worked part-time, they went to school full-time, and the military paid completely for their education. And they were like, yeah, I'm going to have to, stay in the military for another 6 years, but I'm going to be here for 30 years. So what do I care? I would like to see something similar with teachers in Arizona. And what I mean by that is I would love if there's a 24-year-old, let's say not 24, say a 26-year-old teacher, she's got they've got a bachelor's degree, and they're teaching, and they want to go back and get a PhD in English so they can be a better teacher. I would love a program where essentially the state of Arizona says, we will ensure that when you get done with your PhD that you will have a job in education again. And we will pay for you to get that PhD if you go to one of our public universities. And we'll even give you a stipend of $20,000 to live on. Nothing great, but something to go for. And in return, you'll work in public education for call it 2 or 3 years for every year that you put in. And so essentially you say, okay, I can take this deal and I can get a PhD in 4 or 5 years, and then I need to keep teaching for another 10 to 15 years. If not, then it's like, so you can make that decision, then you can come back and you can be a better teacher, more informed, you can do good, and you can be fulfilled because you've got the education that you wanted. And we kind of have a model that we can use to base off of this, which is what my wife did, which is Teach for Arizona. So for that program, it's a 1-year master's. And after you get your master's, the state completely pays for it. And then you teach for a year in any public school. And then once you do that, the state wipes away any financial obligation for your master's degree. If you don't teach for a year, then the state basically comes back to you and says, okay, you reneged on this contract. You have to, your grant is now a loan. We could do the same thing for this program. But I would love to see us really think about, and this is where I come at things. So, how can we, work with the institutions that we have in a way that really reinforces other programs? So how can we use our universities, public universities, to support our teachers and our public schools, and in a way that really supports kids?
Okay, just a reminder, you can still raise your hand once you go to reactions on your page, your Zoom page. Well, I've got a question for you while we're waiting. Now, you've mentioned that you want to have universal preschool program for all 3- and 4-year-old children. And you've mentioned community college, which is at least, what, about $8,000 a year?
5. Well, no, community college is 5 years for 2 years, or 5,000 for 2 years. Yeah.
Okay. So how are you going to fund that?
So, Joe, I'm glad you asked. So we currently have a $5.3 billion surplus. $1.3 billion is said that we can count on that for ongoing programs. The rest of it is, we can basically use for one-time use. And the institution that says this is the Joint Legislative Budget Committee, kind of like the CBO, but at a state level. 1.3 billion each year is enough to create a universal pre-K for every 4-year-old at $15,000 a year. And that's really what we need to be thinking about is in that terms, about $15,000 to $20,000 a year. Right off the bat, that's, with the current revenue that we have, even with the terrible tax cuts that happened last cycle, we can still do that without raising a dime in taxes. We could, for about, if we took $2.8 billion, so, okay, a couple assumptions here. Most community college in the state costs about $2,500 a year, and community college takes generally 2 years. So $5,000 per student. If we say that based on, let's say that we double the number of students who go to community college or higher education from the 30% to about 60% after high school, with about $2.5 billion, we could create a program that would last for nearly a decade. So this would this wouldn't be a permanent program, but with half of the surplus that we have now, we could create a program for the next decade that would essentially tell every single high school graduate, you've got your checks in the mail. You can go to any community college in the state. Most high schoolers live within about a half-hour drive of a community college. You can start your education and transfer to a 4-year. You can get the job training that you need to, instead of starting off making $16 an hour as a welder, you can start off making $19 an hour. There's, it's how, so that, it kind of, the question is, how do we pay for it? Where do we get the money? The money's there. It's there, and we can use how to spend it. It's just a matter of, do we spend it on tax cuts for people who don't need it, or do we invest it in programs that will pay, in terms of, preschool, 10-to-1 return for the state, or 3-to-1 return for the state, for a community college. The numbers are, and really, I encourage everybody to look at this. I know we're running out of time, but when you invest in education, especially early childhood education, the dividends that pay off after a decade or two are phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. It is transformational in a way that, my grandfather went to World War II and he got the GI Bill when he came back. The only reason he did not end up being a, struggling farmer like everyone else in my family had been up until that point was because he was able to go to college and get a bachelor's degree, become a teacher, and then a principal, and then a superintendent, and then end a career working for the Illinois Department of Education. Because of that one bill, that one, infusion to help out a 20, someone younger than I am now, who just got back from Europe to get an education. That meant that, all 3 of his kids had good middle-class lives. Me and my sister and all of our cousins have good middle-class lives. All of my second cousins are on track to go to college. And it's one program 80 years ago that did that. I think that's, if I was going to end on one thing for you to better understand where I come from, that's where I come from. Policy can be transformational. And I really think that it's time that we have elected officials who really think like that, who aren't just saying, I'm going to go to the legislature and I'm going to make sure the Republicans don't pass anything evil. No, go there and say, how can we drastically improve the lives for Arizonans into the 22nd century?
Okay, well, let's give Nathan a big thank you for coming today and speaking to us. And I also want to really salute everyone who participated today. I'm sure we had some great questions. I'm sure we had some great listeners. So another great Democrats of Greater Tucson program. Mike, would you like to, we have our board meeting coming up after this meeting.
Yeah, so please stay on if you're a board member, or if you want to observe the board meeting, you're welcome to hang out as well. But I'd ask that if you're a member but not a member of the board, that you remain on mute so that you won't interfere with our proceedings, but you're welcome to watch.
And Nathan, we have a little bit more time. Could you, how do people get a hold of you and your team as far as funding and volunteering?
So I'm going to put in my email and then my campaign's cell phone, and please reach out to me anytime. Wait, 248-9334. There we go. Right now it's all about meeting donors. So I'm knocking on doors in the mornings and then in the evenings, and I'm making calls right around now when it's too hot to do anything else outside. If you'd like to help me, please reach out. You can leave lit with me. You can talk to voters with me. If you can make a financial contribution, that at the moment is also critical. If I can, I'm looking at sending a mailer, I'm looking at doing other ads. I'd love to be able to hire some people to pay people beyond just the volunteering to help me reach voters, and your contributions will allow me to do so. Yeah, I'm running traditional, and it's every dollar really helps.
Thanks for coming, Nathan.
Okay. Well, and we'll be looking forward to another great meeting next week. So thanks for coming, and see you then.